Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod. So today we are going to talk about a topic that's been the subject of lots of jokes and I'm sure plenty of therapy sessions. There are some books, there's a rock song, and here it is, the mother-in-law. Here's a typical mother-in-law joke. There are lots of them right online. So David is finally engaged and is excited to show off his new bride. Mom, he says to his mother, I'm going to bring home 3 girls, and I want you to guess which one is my fiancée. So 20 minutes later, David walks in the door with 3 girls following him. It's that one, says his mother without blinking an eye. Holy cow, exclaimed David. How in the world did you know it was her? I just don't like her, she replied.
Oh, yes, what fraught territory.
And there aren't any daughter-in-law jokes or son-in-law jokes, or so it goes, but mother-in-law has a real archetypal bedrock that's large, heavy, and deep, and that's what we're going to talk about.
And it goes to the mother archetype, doesn't it?
Yes.
And how that sits in one's life.
The negative aspect of the mother-in-law archetype. The mother-in-law has attracted all of that sort of iron filings like a giant magnet around the negative aspect of the mother.
So talking about the bedrock of it, the ancientness of this tension, there's probably evidence in myths and fairy tales and all kinds of places around this.
Oh, yes. There are a lot of fairy tales, actually, that feature a mother-in-law. And I think hopefully later in the episode, I want to go back to the fairy tales to sort of lift up the kind of prospective function of the mother-in-law and how it can be a positive part of psychic development to contend with that. But just to maybe frame it, I know I have a fairy tale, and Deb, you wanted to share a myth. Why don't you start, and then I'll jump in with my fairy tale.
And I'm just going to put out that why do we talk about myths and fairy tales? Why are we going to that immediately? And the reason for that is that these are our psychic bones. These tales, stories have existed for thousands of years. So they're deep in the human psyche as a kind of pattern. And that's why we turn to them to see what has human history and human experience kind of coalesced around us a subject.
What territory we're in, doesn't it, right away?
Yes, that's perfect. It helps us know what territory we're in. So in the story of Psyche and Eros, which is an old story by Apuleius in a book called The Golden Ass, Psyche is an innocent young thing. There's a whole beginning part to the story, but she looks upon her lover, who is a god, the god Eros, and she is not supposed to do that. So when she does, he flies away, and the magical crystal palace realm of belief and projection and everything coming up roses shatters. And Psyche finds herself alone in the woods, and she's cold, and there's nothing around her. And she appeals to one goddess after another. Well, and they all tell her, no, sorry, we can't really help, because we goddesses kind of stick together, and the mother of your lover is a goddess, and she's the one you have to turn to, and good luck with that. So off goes Psyche, and she finally traipses up the mountain, and her mother-in-law is Aphrodite. Yeah, Venus, the goddess of beauty, and Venus is just as mad as she could be, because not only is this young thing stolen away her son, but she has had the audacity to get pregnant to boot. And in very modern language, Aphrodite reams her out. Her maidservant comes out, grabs her by the hair, drags her into Aphrodite's palace, and Aphrodite says, who do you think you are? You're a measly mortal woman, and you think you can be the wife of my son? And you're going to make me, the goddess of beauty, a grandmother? Just who do you think you are, you upstart little snippet? And then from there, Psyche has 3 tasks that she has to perform. And just before each one, she bemoans her fate. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how she can possibly do these tasks. And each time something comes to her aid. And the last task that she has to do is to go into Hades and retrieve Persephone's beauty box for her mother-in-law. So Persephone is the goddess of the underworld. And Psyche goes in there and she's advised, when you go to hell and back, quite literally, look neither to the left nor the right. People will plead with you for help. Do not do it. Just go down, ask Persephone, get the beauty box and bring it back. And Psyche does all of this. And she gets back and she's got the beauty box. And then comes her moment of transformation. She basically says to herself, what am I going to give this to you for? I'm the one that literally went to hell and back. I want the beauty box. I earned it. I deserve it. She falls unconscious. Her lover Eros comes to find her and rescue her. And she's one of the few mortals that has ever turned into a goddess and goes up to Mount Olympus as an immortal. And I think the baby's name was Joy. But it's a wonderful myth about doing all these demanding tasks at the instigation of her mother-in-law, who is very harsh. But each time, Psyche gains a little bit more ego, a little bit more ego strength, a little bit more sense of empowerment, and finally, a sense of her own authority of, what am I doing this for you for?
Yeah, it's sort of like contending with this harsh mother-in-law is an initiation, isn't it?
Yes.
And, I'm hoping we'll come back to this, but some of the themes right there in that myth are envy, right?
Yes, real envy.
And not wanting, on Nephrodite's part, she doesn't want to be supplanted. And what's relevant about the beginning of the story is that I think that Psyche's parents, if I remember, boast that she's more beautiful than Aphrodite, and for that she's going to be punished. Don't I have that right? Something like that.
I don't think it was so much her parents as it was that she was so beautiful that people came from far and wide. And her sisters, who were not as beautiful and had married other people, envied her. But certainly Aphrodite does.
Right. There's this sense right in the beginning that she's a rival to Aphrodite right in the beginning.
Exactly.
And
that
right. is what the daughter is to the mother-in-law in some cases, is a rival.
A rival for youth, for fertility.
And for the sun.
For beauty, for the sun's love and allegiance. It's a messy business.
Yes, it is. Okay, so here's my fairy tale, which brings up many of the same themes. I'm going to, again, sort of cut to the relevant part of the story, but it's the Grimm's fairy tale of the 6 swans, and it features this young woman whose brothers have been ensorcelled and turned into swans, and to save them, she has to remain silent for some period. It's like 7 years or something, while she carefully makes these coats out of flowers or something. It's very elaborate, but she can't speak. And so she gets married. This man falls in love with her because she's so beautiful, and he brings her back to the palace, and he's a king or prince or something. And so, but she's beautiful, but she doesn't talk. And so the mother-in-law is deeply, deeply suspicious of her and does not like her, as per your joke. And then every time that she has a baby, the mother-in-law steals the child, kills an animal, wipes the blood of the animal on the daughter's mouth, and says she gave birth and then ate the baby, right? And so the daughter can't defend herself because she doesn't speak. So, and then it's only at the end when she gets her voice back, when she can say what really happened and speak truth, and then things fall. But so there's themes right in the beginning here. These archetypal stories are telling us the themes are about the younger generation needing to kind of contend with the older generation and claim some agency.
I liked your word rival, but it's really the daughter-in-law in these stories goes in as an innocent.
Yes.
And it is the older woman who is envious and who also has the power to make the daughter-in-law's life miserable, to set her tasks or to make up stories about her, whatever it is. But it is the innocence, the naivete of the young woman who doesn't realize how beautiful she is, that she has the gift of fertility. She's the love object for the beloved son, and that all of this is going on and she doesn't defend herself. Or can't defend herself.
Should we move this into sort of the clinical realm and talk about what it looks like in the real lives of real people?
Let's do that. I'm all ears.
Oh gosh. So, do you want to start? Do you have some stories?
One of my earliest clients had a problematic mother-in-law, and it was very interesting. The mother-in-law would not wipe her shoes when she came into her house and was, really kind of openly disrespectful. And I remember as this was years ago, as a young clinician kind of thinking that, there are two sides to every story and, what else is going on here and so on and so forth. And over time, kind of like Psyche, of realizing, wait a minute, there just has to be some limit setting. And this young woman had more capability than I had for a long time to draw the line and set the limits and say to her mother-in-law, you can't come in my house if you don't wipe your feet when you come in. You can't say things like this to me. Now, interestingly, her husband did not take a similar stand. But because he has two women, his mother, his wife, he felt caught between a rock and a hard place, I guess. And so it falls to the young woman to set those boundaries and claim her authority. And I know that it took me a very, very, very long time to do that with my mother-in-law. This young woman is not aware of how desirable she is and how valuable her fertility is, her capabilities, her beginning on a career path. Of all of this is ahead of her, and it is behind the older woman.
And you don't realize how bittersweet that can be.
Exactly.
When you're on that side of it. I just want to say that clinically, I really think it's important that the spouse, the partner, the husband, whatever that is, stand with the partner or spouse against the mother. Like there has to be a clear line drawn around that new family.
I completely agree. And when I have in subsequent years had a couple in my practice where the daughter's or daughter-in-law's relationship with her mother-in-law has been part of the problems that they're there to discuss, I have immediately reframed it as it is not a problem between the two women. It is a problem for the couple. That the husband and the wife have to stand together. It doesn't mean my wife is always right. It's not a right-wrong thing, but it is a boundary setting.
Yes,
we have a family of our own, even if there are just two of us. And we're going to resolve this between ourselves and how things should be. And then we are going to say to the mother-in-law or the parents-in-law, this is how it is.
It makes sense that the husband's realignment with his wife would be the necessary information and psychic stress to shift the mother out of her primary relationship to the son, that she would need that evidence to pierce whatever fantasies she's trying to sustain that underlie that aggression.
And, speaking of that, I mean, wanting to lift up every side, I mean, you were talking about, being this young woman and having this whole life ahead of you, not really understanding what it's like to be on the other side and have this whole life behind you. And the real grief that must be there when your child really, I mean, marriage is a significant point of psychic separation. And it must be hard. I mean, I'm planning on forbidding either of my children from ever getting married.
I think that makes so much sense.
Good job.
And good luck with that.
They can't leave me. No, obviously.
Well, I think it's hard for the older woman, who looks at this young woman who doesn't know anywhere near as much as the older woman does, and who could say, look, I know him a lot better than you do. I've been his mother for X number of years.
Right.
You're his relatively new wife of a year, even 5 years.
Yeah.
I can see that it's difficult, but when it comes out as a kind of control or a domineering or critical, angry, those kinds of feelings, when they come into the field, it denies the older woman her right to grieve
Yes.
the loss of her son and being the main woman, the primary love object, feminine love object of the son's world. It is hard to be supplanted, and there is a grief of that. And as Jung talks about life and being in the morning and the afternoon and the evening of your life, the mother-in-law is at least in the afternoon of her life.
Yeah, the sun
And-
is setting.
And the
And
sun
for the
is
daughter,
setting.
it's daughter-in-law, it's rising.
Mortality is somewhere in the background,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a young mother-in-law. And what are the gifts for her? What's in it for her?
Being a grandmother, which Aphrodite was like, hell no, I'm not ready for that.
Well, in my imagination, I would think that the transition for the mother-in-law would be to be able to see the daughter-in-law as a true daughter, and for the libido to be able to land there in the same way that any mother has to be able to move into this vicarious enjoyment, that way of sharing the daughter's successes through the vicarious participation in order to let go of the envy or other kinds of interfering emotions. So the mother-in-law would have, I imagine, would have to claim the daughter-in-law as her own to resolve some of that.
Well, that takes me to the place of yes, but this isn't her daughter. My daughter-in-law comes from a totally different tribe with totally different values, totally different kinds of ambitions. She's going to raise her children if she has them, if she can choose to have them or not. If she chooses to have them, she's going to raise them very differently from the way I raised my children. And it's asking a lot of bridging the differences or appreciating the differences for the mother-in-law to see this young woman doing everything entirely differently.
Yeah, I think that's really
But isn't
hard.
that the struggle that every mother has with their daughter as she individuates from her? That
No.
your own daughters will do things they will reject
Absolutely
how they were
not.
raised. I just lost a finger in the room right now. I'm going to patch that up and be right back.
You have 9 left.
No, but I think a lot of times there does continue to be a very cozy relationship between adult daughters and their mother. Not always, but,
Yes.
but they're often, it is frequently kind of very simpatico.
And the daughter's success is a kind of success for the mother as well. It's a sort of a narcissistic extension that, my daughter-in-law is running for Senate. And that reflects well on me, that because I raised her, and look how wonderful and successful she's
that
being.
vicarious
And-
participation.
Right. Sort of like, the power behind the throne or something like that. Whereas the daughter-in-law is, as Lisa said,
other.
it's a rival, and it's other.
I realize that we're talking a lot about daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law, but of course, men have mothers-in-laws too, and that has a whole different dynamic.
Interesting point.
Right. We're sort of concentrating on the same part. But a lot of those jokes that you were alluding to, a lot of those are sort of from the perspective of the man dealing with a mother-in-law who perhaps is a bit tyrannical or sort of, maybe in too closely connected with the daughter and sort of trying to control everything from behind the scenes. I mean, that's sort of the stereotype, or we could say the archetype.
So it's the rivalry in a way for the son. And is the son going to separate from the mother-in-law and from his mother and bond with a female partner?
And he can't do that if his mother-in-law is too intrusive. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the mother-daughter bond, like Demeter and Kore, who became Persephone, he can't do that if that mother-daughter bond is too strong.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so there is
A
a
different
mother-in-law.
problem.
There's a mother-in-law configuration, right? You've got Hades and his new young wife, Persephone, and then like the mother-in-law is like all up in his business. Demeter is not going to let him have his wife.
For 6 months out of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she wins.
Yeah, he does.
But it's a kind of she wins because, she's scorching the entire earth, and all the Olympians kind of have to gang up to create this, negotiation there.
Right.
So there's another archetypal strand here, is how very, very close and powerful the mother-daughter bond can be.
Yes.
It's very primal. Mm-hmm. I know it as a mother with a daughter, and my daughter-in-law, when they were having children. Where was I? In the delivery room, of just, it can be very, very powerful. Mm-hmm. And it's a different problem for the son-in-law with a mother-in-law. The son-in-law is not a rival the way another woman is.
I think the danger is that he'll just be kind of rendered irrelevant.
Exactly.
But I think the son-in-law,
sidelined.
Mm-hmm. The son-in-law is contending with the mother-in-law's image of the kind of man the daughter deserves or should have.
Yes.
So I think actually both sons and son-in-laws are both dealing with the mother's fantasies of what a real man should look like and fighting for their own kind of legitimacy. Mm-hmm. So there's a little bit of that, but I feel like many men are fairly resilient to that in my own practice. Mm-hmm. I have to say that in all the years I've worked, I don't think I have ever had a client come in with a mother-in-law complaint.
Oh,
ever. Not really. One. So this is a whole initiation for me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that, I have a lot of mostly young women coming in, younger women coming in, contending with difficult, overbearing, domineering mothers-in-law who are perhaps trying to kind of sidetrack the marriage. Honestly. And then on the other side, I have women who are mothers-in-law.
I've had them too.
Who are having extremely painful experiences with a rejecting daughter-in-law.
That can be really, really painful. I've definitely had situations where mothers come in and feel that they don't have adequate access to the grandchildren because the daughter-in-law is not approving or is not aligned adequately, and there is great suffering around that. Mm-hmm.
Well, then you really feel supplanted and replaced and irrelevant. If you don't have access to that new family, or if you're mistreated or treated disrespectfully.
Isn't there a real sadness here? How hard it is for us to get along with each other. Mm-hmm. And I've known women too, some in my personal life, who have just been rejected immediately before the daughter-in-law has really had a chance to even get to know them. Mm-hmm. But that there's been this kind of exile or sidelining ipso facto, and it's very, very sad for the older woman who would like to make a contribution and help with grandchildren and be a loving presence in the home.
But it's a difficult place to be, because you were the one that had the authority. You were the one who kind of you were in charge, and now it's sort of like it's like retiring and then coming back to work as the intern or something. Suddenly you're sort of not subservient, but you've passed the baton in a way, and it can be very difficult to kind of find your new place. I mean, I think it's like, I don't know, what is that like, sort of being the queen mother? It's like you're a figurehead, but you don't have any, you're no longer center stage.
Yes.
I mean, if you're doing it right.
So there's a real loss of power, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And in many cultures, I mean, and in the story that I sort of briefly recapped about Psyche and her mother-in-law Aphrodite, the mother-in-law had the power. And in some societies, like in India, where the new bride moves into her husband's home and family, the mother-in-law still has power in the home.
And actually,
But today in the United States, the power is in the daughter-in-law.
yeah, that's true. That's that's a good point. There's a really brutal mother-in-law fairy tale that comes out of India, and I just don't remember it very well right now. But you're right. It's these what are those, like, matrilineal cultures where the bride goes to the mother-in-law. That's a whole dynamic where, and then she has to, and that is actually true in Indian culture, at least in some places, and there's quite a power dynamic.
And have
there.
a tremendous subservient role for the rest of her life.
Yes.
But what I want to ask, just surveying out, is what do we imagine is the psychological challenge for the mother-in-law to transition out of the role of the mother? Because that's really what's happened. Is he's, the son-in-law's gone. There's an empty nest. He's formulating his own life there. The role of the mother is now manifesting in the daughter-in-law, perhaps, if she's choosing to have children. So that liberates the mother-in-law from becoming an in-law. She doesn't have to be a mother-in-law. She can be an in-law. And what's necessary to absorb that, to adapt to the reality, and also be liberated from the domination of that archetype into whatever the next stage is?
Well, I can share some of my own experience maybe with this, because I am a mother-in-law. I've had 2 daughters-in-law. And I had, as a young woman, a very difficult mother-in-law. So partly, I think I learned what not to do. And what it feels, a sense of empathy, and what I felt like as a young woman, and maybe I sort of project that onto my daughters-in-law. But I remember what it's like to be unsure and to be finding your way and wanting to, make your own family the way you want it to be.
And wanting to be liked and gain approval and love.
And absolutely, the daughter-in-law, as I did, I hoped very, very much for real mothering from my mother-in-law. The other part, too, of this is that I think the mother-in-law has to have, to use the Jungian word, done some individuation work on her own. If the identity is that I'm a mother, I'm a parent, I'm a wife, I'm a homemaker, you're out of a job at some age. Your kids have gone off to their own lives and careers, whether they're married or not. And there has to be something that is meaningful to you in the second stage of your life. Whether it's a volunteer job or something very personal, there's a whole range available, but there has to be something rewarding for you in the afternoon of your life that matters to you, so that you're not still trying to run a family, as it were.
Yeah, otherwise you're just kind of hanging on to this old role and kind of clinging to it for dear life.
But I want to speculate just for a minute, just in terms of thinking about very broad archetypes. So the mother-in-law comes to this crisis, and she realizes that her drives, her skill set as the mother she had been, must now recede. What would an alternative paradigm be? For instance, and I'm just saying this kind of innocently, could she think of herself as a sister to this new woman?
That's wrong.
Could she find another paradigm? Okay, I stand. I've lost another finger. I'll be right back. But,
something has really been constellated.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Lisa and I are in this.
You're fierce. I am happy to be quiet. You're
happy to be devoured.
That's right.
Great. Finger by finger.
Yeah. No, I think the archetype is the crone, the wise old woman. That's what I think it is.
And what constitutes, what are the characteristics of the wise old woman? So sure.
Well, she doesn't give a fuck. That's one thing about the wise old woman. And
about collective norms and values, she just does her thing.
Does not want to be liked.
When I'm old, I shall wear purple.
Yes, yeah. But she is. But there can be great warmth there, and there's power and wisdom, And I think the tragic thing with some of the stories that we were talking about in our practice with women who've been so just summarily rejected by a daughter-in-law is that she can't play that role.
She can't make the transition.
She doesn't have an opportunity to be seen for her wisdom or consulted for her wisdom.
But what you just said is, that part where she doesn't give a fuck.
Yeah.
She doesn't have that. She still needs the acceptance, a certain kind of role. She has a dream, etc., rather than saying, that's too bad, and I wish it could have been otherwise, but I'm going to go do X or Y or Z instead.
You're right.
And that it comes from within. It's not so much about what I'm doing. I'm volunteering at the library or whatever else, but having an inner center that has purpose and meaning that really can light up your life.
And be part of your individuation.
Yes.
So that while there's a great loss in, becoming a mother-in-law because it means that you're in sort of the afternoon of your life, and you're being supplanted. It's like the great wheel of life has turned another notch, and you're now on the downward part of the slope for sure. That's part of what happens. God, I'm saying this and I'm like, really? My kids are not going to get married? No.
I found it very enlivening to be free of a lot of the household responsibilities and worrying about people.
Yes.
And meeting people's needs.
Yeah.
And responding to people and younger people. It's nice for me to basically do what I want to do. And I wouldn't quite say it's the not caring. However, it's an opportunity to gain a deeper and more solid sense of self so that what other people do or don't do does not determine me so much.
Right. So if we're looking that sort of ideally on an archetypal level, this confrontation or this contending between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law could be part of an individuation journey for both of them.
Yes.
I want to reference sort of the symbolic field again and talk about how, Deb, you said a minute ago, the daughter-in-law is kind of an innocent, maybe. Okay. And we certainly see that in the story of Psyche or in, the fairy tale that I shared. And there's this way that the innocent young woman must contend with or come to terms with that, the sort of, I want to say sort of the terrible mother.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And in doing so, she gains, claims shadow, and stands in her own authority and claims agency. And this is what the daughter-in-law gets to learn from the mother-in-law, ideally.
And some of it is a very internal task. So that a younger woman, these archetypes are alive and they're out there. So the younger woman's mother-in-law, let's say, I'm thinking of the comedy Everybody Loves Raymond.
Oh, that's like one of my favorite
Okay,
mother-in-laws.
So Marie is the mother-in-law. And she comes over and she criticizes Deborah over and over and over again in a very sort of underhanded, passive-aggressive way. One scene is Marie walking into Deborah's house with a box of baking soda to put in Deborah's refrigerator because, dear, the last time I was here, I noticed there was a smell in your refrigerator. And Deborah, the younger woman, says, Marie, I can do that. And Marie says, oh, yes, dear, but you don't.
She's just she's great. I love that character. She's very funny.
So sure, there is an opportunity for both women to do some individuating and for the younger woman to stand up for herself in defense of her own home and her own refrigerator in this case.
And claim some of the punchiness of the older woman in a way. I can stand toe to toe with you, and I don't have to be the helpless damsel, the helpless innocent. I can have a say here.
Yeah, it is the negative mother, and those little things, like that little incident with Deborah, can create in a human, somebody that's really living in real life and not in a TV show, it can constellate the negative mother image in a huge way of, that my mother-in-law, you'll never believe what she did. She came over and she said that, and it could be some little picayune thing like the baking soda, but archetypally it's huge.
Yeah, it's a
and
powerful archetypal
it turns
field.
a regular old human being who's an older woman into the terrible mother.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I don't think older women may necessarily understand how powerful they still are. That they are in their crone stage, and these seemingly little or casual remarks have the force of shots from a cannon to the younger woman who does need to find her own way and keep house her own way and raise her children her own way. That archetype of the terrible mother is very easily constellated.
So do you feel like the daughter-in-law is naively expecting just affirmation from the mother-in-law?
I think that can sometimes be the case. And that's where the daughter-in-law would be in a place where she kind of wants to be pleasing and just expects, as you did, Deb, I'm going to find good mothering here, and I'm going to be pleasing, and I'm going to be nice, and everyone's going to like me. And I mean, for many women, not all of us, but for many of us, one of the things that we have to learn is to really claim our own authority. And that only comes after we've claimed aggression. And that, for some women, is difficult to get in touch with. But I guess I'm saying that this sort of this battlefront between mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws can be a place where aggression gets negotiated and claimed for the younger woman. Aggression in the sense of assertiveness, not coming to fisticuffs.
And I think in the real world, as it gets, as Winnie the Pooh said, complicateder and complicateder, because most mothers-in-law are not just all good or all bad,
Right.
and neither are daughters-in-law. So there's good stuff to be had, and there's wounding that takes place, and misunderstandings, and power dynamics, and envy, and innocence, and a whole host of other things. The list is very long. That two very real people and the man who is related to both women, they all have to sort this out for themselves. It's very seldom the case that the person is just so bad that you just write off the relationship. We struggle through these things.
Well, that sounds like a good and realistic place to take a pause and shift to our dream analysis.
So a listener sent in the following dream. The dreamer is a 54-year-old female who works as a psychotherapist. And here's the dream. Somehow my baby's right arm has come out of her socket and is completely detached. I try to put it back into her socket, hoping for a miracle, which doesn't happen. So I put her back into her cot. Later, I look for her, thinking I need to feed her, but cannot find her. I search high and low. Still, there's no baby. By chance, I find her in another room. It was like she was deliberately moved there. Her skin is very cold, but she is alive. Her arm is still detached. I'll have to take her to the doctor's, I think, and get her arm sewn back on, if that's even possible. I wake up. The feelings in the dream were panic, worried, and fearful. And context, she says, I dreamt this last month, and the only transition that comes to mind is that I'm thinking of relocating, but not entirely sure it's the right time yet. It might be relevant to say I'm left-handed. And yeah, so
did she mention which arm is?
The
Right
baby's
arm.
right arm.
It's the right arm. Yeah. Somehow become detached. That's a very, very strange way of languaging that.
Has
very
come
aloof.
out of her socket and is completely detached. But there, you don't get the sense of having been severed, right? It's more like almost like that baby doll's arms would come out of the socket, you know.
But there's a dismemberment and of the right arm, and at the end, the dreamer says, "It's almost as if I've been left left-handed. Is that right?
She says in the context, this is not part of the dream. She just says it might be relevant to say I'm left-handed. So the dreamer is left-handed.
Okay. I'm thinking about what's an arm, and for most people, what's a right arm? You know, we talk about, oh, so-and-so has been my right arm. He's my right-hand person, my right-hand man. And what's an arm? They're so related to agency, but a baby doesn't have agency. Although we don't know how old is this, an infant or a toddler? I don't know.
Well, the baby's in her cot. You kind of get the feeling the baby can't walk, but we don't know for sure. And of course, you know, as I think I've said in earlier podcasts, I think one of my first questions would be, well, how old is this baby? You know? And 3 to 6 months or something. And then I might say, and what happened 3 to 6 months ago? Because, I mean, especially given the age of the streamer, I think we're on safe ground to assume she does not indeed have a child this age. And, you know, we don't know if she ever had children, but this is some kind of psychic baby for sure, right? So,
and the dreamer's feeling in the dream was panic, worry, fearful. And I think I'm kind of feeling some of that too. Of like, wow, this is really awful.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The skin's cold.
The skin is cold. We don't know how it's come off. I try to put it back.
She's missing for a while.
She's missing, and it's all really pretty awful and almost without a story here. I'm looking for the story, that this happened and then this and then this. But it doesn't seem to, it just kind of goes from bad to worse.
But it doesn't seem that the dream ego is responding in a way that you would expect. I try to reattach the arm and I can't, so I put her back in, and then I come back after a while. That even though the dreamer reports there's a sense of alarm, that the behaviors in the dream don't reflect that. I'm looking at just the two words, detached versus attached.
Yeah.
Lift up over the gory imagery just for a minute and to talk about attachment and detachment. And there is a quality in the dream which I think is very disturbing, that the dream ego seems very detached or has somehow become detached.
Yeah, I mean, the dream ego is worried, but there is a sense of detachment because she puts her in her cot and just says, later I look for her, but it's like she sort of left her in the cot and then she is looking looking high and low. I mean, there is anxiety.
Yes, but if you walked in, you're like, oh, baby's arm fell off. Oops. Let it sort itself out for a while and then you'll just come back and check on her.
Exactly.
That there is not enough alarm and agency around this, but she would have to be very detached to kind of float away and just ponder something.
There is a sense of, I want to say, like helplessness. That's what I get.
What I'm thinking about is that even though the feeling in the dream was, worry and panic and so on, that the dream ego's actions are not commensurate with the crisis of the situation as it is, right?
That if we saw that, we would think she was dissociated.
Yeah, exactly.
Which interestingly is a form of dismemberment.
Yes.
That the ego is been severed from other psychological factors so that it can't access itself properly given what's going on.
So I want to lift up some other things about this dream. So I have a fairly strong sense of what this dream might be about just because I've seen other dreams like this. And, sort of where there's something wrong with the baby and there's a sense of detachment about it and that sort of thing. And what this often points to is some element in the psyche, and it's a new, young, pretty new thing. And so that could be a hope, an attitude, a creative project, right? That this could be. And it might be, about the same age as the baby, so maybe you've recently cultivated a new attitude, say, for the past number of months. Okay, so maybe that's something like the baby in the dream. And it has not been adequately attended to. You have, it is a picture of a self-betrayal. you haven't taken care of this child of yours. You have let yourself down by not taking good care of it. And there is the sense of something transpersonal in the dream, because she says, I find her in another room. It was like she was deliberately moved. So there's some other agent in the dream, maybe, who is doing something with this baby, which to me feels kind of hopeful, that there's some other actor here that's but very much behind the scenes. And I also think it's positive that at the very last part of the dream is that she's alive, and I'll have to take her to the doctors. So there is a sense that finally the right thing is being done. But my fantasy about this dreamer, and I want to really stress that, we're certainly not trying to say that we know what this dream about was any authority. We're kind of unpacking it and being playful with it, if you will, in a way of exploring it. But of course, we couldn't really interpret this dream unless we had the dreamer with us. But here's a fantasy of mine, that this dreamer had something important cooking for her that she didn't adequately attend to. I mean, my own fantasy about psychotherapists is that we tend to be really, really good at taking care of other people, and sometimes we don't take such good care of ourselves. So I would wonder if perhaps something like that had happened. And the dream is a little bit of a reminder of it's time to tend to your own inner child here.
And we've said before that a baby often symbolizes potential for the future, the new thing. People have creative babies, figurative babies, symbolic babies, and that would be, given the age of the dreamer, clearly what this is, that some new thing is not being tended to.
I think that we're skirting over something, we're defending against something, because the image of the baby whose arm has come off is horrifying. It's not just an oops, I forgot to water the plant. It's horrifying. Yeah. So there's a way in which, we've kind of drifted to this very light ways of, it's maybe an attitude, that's something that just is you aren't keeping up with, or a project. This is really massive to me.
Okay,
it's blood-curdling.
Here's something I want to say. First of all, I'm not saying it's a light thing. I'm saying that the dreamer has experienced significant self-betrayal.
So what's an example of that? How can we ground that at the level of horror?
Well, but I want to say one thing about horror, and then I'll try to come back and make up an example, okay? But dreams use really dramatic language, right? So, like, how many times does someone come in and tell you, oh my God, Hitler was in my dream, there were Nazis, and it's like, and you sort of unpack it, it's like, oh, that's like your anger issue. Dreams use really, really dramatic language. And I'm not saying that the tenor of it doesn't matter, but it's important to also remember the dream is sort of trying to get your attention. So it chooses this very kind of overblown language. So I'm not saying that there isn't something serious here. Okay. Okay, so let's think about what a significant, an example of like a significant betrayal might be. Let's say that you finally decided to get your health under control, and you've promised yourself you're going to eat better and you're going to exercise, and it's important because you're 54 years old and things can start to go wrong when you're in your 50s, and maybe something already has. So maybe it really, really matters if you take care of yourself. But you get too busy and you stop eating right. That's the kind of thing. And it is a real self-betrayal, because you're not tending to your own animal self the way you need to.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I think that happens, and the psyche can be intensely constructive. But when I look at this dream, where I would want to go is, this would be the kind of dream somebody would have who has a resurfacing memory of their own abuse as a child, or the discovery or the suspicion that maybe a child that's in their care is being abused. I think that having an arm fall off a child is so big to me that I think we're looking at something that the dream ego is, the magnitude of it is so large that just as you said, they're just stunned. That they just, it's like finding out that a child's been abused and, telling them to go watch television, or giving them a piece of candy, which happens, by the way. because people just dissociate from the horror of what's surfacing that way. That, to me, would be the kind of gasping
You're
potential
having
of the
strong.
image.
You're having a very strong reaction to
that
this
image. Yes, it's very powerful. To
You're
me.
feeling a lot of the feeling that's been sort of split off in the dream.
And then trying to match a kind of psychological event that would sync up with something that's that horrifying.
Well, what I would also, I mean, I think there was probably some significant failing in this person's childhood, right? Because you bring up even this term of attachment, right? And now she's sort of failing herself again in some way. So there's probably some echo back to an older kind of wound.
Yes, and certainly failing to relate properly to whatever the child with this massive injury is undergoing. Also, the other thing is there's no description of the child having any form of life. Is it crying? Is it squirming? Is it responding to the fact that its arm's fallen off? That's not being registered or recorded.
And it's cold.
It's cold. This is deep, profound territory, I think. And I don't know, it makes me feel cautious that we're even talking about it. I mean, it's because the way it rings downward is, you know, I don't know, it causes a gasp in me.
So it's really, this dream is really a call to the dreamer to pay attention to something important that may be being minimized, not felt significantly enough, not paid enough attention to in the dreamer's life. In the notes, she mentioned relocating. That can have all kinds of levels of meaning, but of some kind, at least it clearly implies some kind of change that is under consideration. And whether it's something as specific as relocating geographically, let's say, or some other kind of inner relocation, inner shift, inner move, as it were, we don't know. But it does seem that Psyche is saying that things are more serious than the dream ego seems to think they are.
And even the panicky feelings that the dreamer records afterwards is often the response when a deep, profound issue is trying to surface, that we have perhaps very necessarily and for good reason put away. But the encouraging thing, I think, is that the dream maker constellates dreams because we have a readiness, believes we can face it, whatever it is.
Well, and again, I think that there are some places in this dream that point to help with this perhaps mysterious figure who moves the baby so that the dreamer can find her, and the sense that there is a doctor somewhere to go to.
There's an image of at least healing and help. The last thing I want to just mention in terms of the child just losing connection to a limb is substantial childhood neglect can induce this kind of state that as an infant is in tremendous amount of distress about any number of things that is not responded to well or properly by the caregivers. The child will dissociate as a way of coping with the fact that the state of anguish that it's in, even just the state of anguish of being unattended to, being alone in the dark with a caregiver that won't respond, causes a child to send parts of themselves away. So, one, to find the child and the part that has been sent away in the proximity of each other does point to the potential for a remembrance, a remembering of something, which could be a remembering of very early childhood feeling states that are very powerful, and that in order to facilitate or to even tolerate the remembering of the pieces, that the doctor, another therapist, some form of a holding, containing environment that has healing as its primary intention needs to be found, would be my guess.
Yeah, and there's stuff that we really can't say for sure without the dreamer. So in some sense...
Yes, we know that, of course.
This is speculation, obviously.
It's clear that when we talk about dreams, that we're exemplifying ways of working with dreams, themes, and images, applying them potentially to psychological frameworks, trauma frameworks, the telos, or the forward movement or resolution of things. I hope and expect that the listeners know that we're not giving a session to the person who submitted it,
Right.
but we are giving people examples, as Jung did in his publications. He would post a tiny bit of case material and he'd unpack a dream.
Yes.
He wasn't apologizing for that. He was teaching people that this is a way of working with image and theme and amplifications and associations that are helpful to people to know in that way. So we know that, and I think the listeners do.
So this feels like an appropriate place to come to a conclusion for this time.
It does.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.